Hello, everyone. Very briefly, I'm Daniele. I work at Canonical. I'm a director of engineering. There's my curriculum vitae. I have been involved in various open source things for several years. I live in Cardiff, the UK, maar ik woon ook in Leiden, net om de hoek van hier, just up the road. My colleagues are here. I work in documentation. My colleagues are here at Canonical. They've got a booth, so do go and visit them. I'll show this at the end, this QR code. We're hiring people for hundreds of different roles, and including in documentation, so go and speak to my colleagues in the Canonical Open Documentation Academy to know more about that. I want to talk to you about God. Let's talk about God. I interviewed a candidate for a technical author a year or so ago, and I asked her, what do you enjoy about programming? And she said, when I'm programming, I'm a little god. I create a whole world, and I put it in motion, it comes alive, my own universe. And I thought, I know how you feel. And I thought, actually, I know how God felt. God, at the beginning of the time, with a new text editor window in front of him and a blinking cursor, a blank page, the moment before creation. So, programmers, we know what that feels like. Because God said, let there be light, and there was light. And it's the same way in programming. We say, let such and such be the case, and then it is indeed the case. It's the case because we said it. And so it's really nice to have something in common with God. In a way, we're working in the same industry. It's just really a difference of scale, perhaps. But the most important thing is that we, like God, we both do things with words. So that's one thing that we share, this creativity as the act of creation, of bringing things into being. What we will comes into existence, comes into being through our will. And there's nowhere else we can have that. In the rest of the world, I cannot bring things into existence through my will alone. So I have the power to do all kinds of things in the world. I can move a chair, I can turn on a light, I can pour a glass of water. And I can do things in programs too. So in Python, I can break out of a loop, I can add two values, I can call a function. But merely doing things is not the same as bringing things into existence. And also in the world, I can command. I can ask my colleagues to schedule a meeting, or my children to make less noise, or the taxi driver to take me home. And in programs, I can tell Python to do things. I can tell it to print something, or initiate a connection, or return a value. So I'm doing things with words, just like God did. But even so, commanding is not the same as bringing things into existence. Because in the world, I cannot make something the case just by saying it. Saying something doesn't make it so. I can't bring things into existence. However hard I try, there won't be light. But as a programmer, I can create an object. And programming is about the will, about doing and commanding, making things so, like x equals 1, bringing things into existence. And I can do it just by using words, just like God. And that's really an amazing power. Excuse me, administration. Finn, if you can hear me, could you make the speaker notes a little bit bigger? Please. Thank you. So speaking of Python, by the way, when God said, let there be light, he was using the subjunctive mood correctly. Let there be light. And unlike God, Python doesn't do that correctly. So in Python we say x equals 1, the let of let x equals 1 is implicit. Really, x equals 1 is an assertion of equality. The let is implicit, as I say, but it would be much nicer if we said let x equals 1, and then we wouldn't need to use that ugly double equal signs to assert equality. So it's a shame that Python is not as good as God in that respect. Anyway, that was an aside, really, because my point is that programming is a world of intention. We program our will in symbols to be executed by machines. Programming is the expression of our will. Fiat voluntas tua, thy will be done. Everything in programming seems to be about our intention. So I love automated testing. It's a fantastic idea. I write some code, and then I write some other code to check that the first code is doing what it's supposed to be doing. It's like you send your 12-year-old to the bakery to buy a loaf of bread, and then you send his brother after him 5 minutes later to make sure he goes and gets the right stuff. Automated testing, everything in program, our agile methodology is all about making sure that what gets done is what we actually intended to get done. It's a discipline that's entirely aligned around intention. Success in programming is the realization of intention. So that's where the meaning and value in programming lie. So programming is one of those quite a long list of things that I like doing, that I enjoy doing, but I'm not actually that good at. I would like to be a better programmer, but actually, to be honest, I'm content with what I can do. I came to it so late in life that it all seems like a gift, a bonus. So I don't feel much pain, but some other things, they do give me a little bit more pain. You know, that my skills in the kitchen or my repertoire is a little bit limited, or worse, playing the guitar. I feel a real kind of envy of people who can do that well, or photography. And that last one really hurts because I understand it and I want it. I want it a lot, and I can't have it. Henri Cartier-Bresson said, your first 10,000 photographs are your worst. What he neglected to mention is that as soon as you stop, the counter resets to 0. But still, there are consolations in both of these crafts, and they're the consolations of the machinery. So I'm fascinated by programming and philosophy and photography, but also by computers and cameras, the artifacts of those arts. I love machines and doing things with them. I was going to say the word playing, but I hesitate to use that. Anyway, pleasure in the equipment adds a kind of dimension to the experience. It adds to the pleasure, and it takes away some of the sting of not being so good at it, because they are both, computing and photography, disciplines with wonderful machines that we can enjoy. And as in photography, in programming, the relationship between the practitioners and the tools is an important part of the craft. People say that, a true craftsperson is not interested in the tools. I think that's wrong. I think a true craftsperson feels something for and about those tools. But it's still only a consolation prize, especially in programming. The essential fascination in programming lies in something else. I think it lies in intention, in will. And intention is such an interesting word. It comes from Latin, to intend. It means to stretch or to reach out towards. And there are these constellations of verbs and nouns that spiral out from it. I don't know if anyone has a background in medicine. Even wounds have intentions according to how they are healing. And it's like tracing rivers and mountains and roads on a map. These words, they come out of other words, and they occupy different but related spaces in different languages, slightly different ones as well. And none of this proves anything, although you might recognize some of those patterns there that all come out from this idea of stretching. It doesn't prove anything, but it still tells us something and it shows us something. It puts a light on something for us. And if we think about programming as intention, then that's stretching out to the world with our will, with our intention to impose ourselves on the world, or at least some part of it. And it's active. It's about doing and commanding and making things the case and making things come into being. And it's possible to become a little bit wrapped up in all of this intention, because actually I think intention is not the only kind of meaning that there is, not the only kind of value. There are other clusters of words and meanings around here that tell us different stories. There's attention, to pay attention, to attend. And it has the same origins in Latin of stretching, but this time it's of stretching to rather than stretching towards. About making contact rather than reaching towards something that you haven't attained or doesn't exist yet. So there's meaning in this, but it's not meaning of the will. It's the meaning of being there with something, attending, like you're attending now. You know, you're giving me your attention, I hope. So where is, in programming, our attention? Or where is the attention of programmers? Or what has being a programmer done to my attention? And I love programming, and I love photography. I don't think it matters that I'm not that good at either art. But the reason I'm not a very good programmer is not because I lack intention or will. I am full of will. I'm willful. I've got it in abundance. But I can tell you exactly why I am not a better photographer, and that's because my power of attention is weak. My power of being there, my power to be present. This is Garry Winogrand. He's the photographer who says the most to me, who fascinates me the most. A photographer does things with light instead of words, unlike a programmer or God. And when God said, "Let there be light," obviously, he was looking forward to the invention of photography in the 19th century, several billion years later. That's what I call patience. And then he had to wait another 150 years or so for Garry Winogrand to come along. Winogrand he died quite young. He was staggeringly prolific. He's estimated to have taken about 1 million photographs. If you stretched out the 35mm film, it would reach from here almost to Amsterdam. He left behind about 300,000 unedited images, several thousand rolls that were developed but not even printed, thousands just printed to contact sheets, and several thousand rolls that weren't even developed. So photographs that he himself had never even seen. Stephen Shaw, who was is another of the great photographers of our age, said that it's a bit like Beethoven. He didn't need to hear his music to know what it sounded like. And so it was with Winogrand, that he didn't need to see his pictures to know what they would look like. But actually, Winogrand said, "I photograph to see what things look like photographed." He said, "I photograph to see what the world looks like in photographs." He said, "A photograph is what something looks like to a camera." And actually, to me, it looks like quite a lot of the people in those photographs would quite like to punch him in the face. And probably at that moment, they indeed did want to punch him in the face, because he was photographing mostly with a 28mm lens. So he was up there in people's faces, actually within punching distance. So it's really no surprise that you see so many murderous looks in those photographs. But he was actually too fast to get punched because he would shoot an entire roll of 36 frames in the length of a short city block. Anyway, what does this say about attention? This is one of his photographs from 1964, the Texas State Fair. And there's all the noise and this busy hustle and motion and commotion. There's an animal and its handler, a prize steer. It's part of the excitement. And the animal is swinging its head back and forth, and the handler's ducking away. And in all of this movement and this flux of 1,000 things going on at the same time, there's one instant in this unceasing collision of bodies, and the flicking tongue of the steer meets the brim of the handler's hat in a perfect symmetry. And there's this resolving of order out of disorder. And in the next instant, it would have dissolved back into disorder. And that symmetry and form and meaning was available only in that instant, for 1/120th of a second that it took to take the photograph. Only from that point of view, only along that line of sight. Maybe something never to be repeated again in the life of the universe. And somehow, Garry Winogrand was there for it. And I want to ask, how? What kind of power to be there? To be there so much with such totality of presence. I am floored, because I feel a kind of shiver when I think about that time stands still and then lasts forever. This is the power of attention, of being absolutely present. I think this is the photograph that I love best in the whole world. Also from 1964, the World's Fair in New York. I can get lost in this photograph. I play it back to myself sometimes with my eyes closed, trying to remember it and its patterns. And what I see are patterns and rhythms and repetitions and disjunctions and variations, as if it were a piece of music that I could play back to myself. And I find it almost exhaustible in its forms and the relationships and the reflections that it contains, all their combinations. Relationship after relationship in that image makes sense, and I keep finding new ones. So every direction, every angle, every bend of elbow or knee or foot and shoe, hands and eyes, and also the relationships of the bigger wholes of the bodies and those people, those 8 people all at once in their situations in the world. Everything in that one instant. And he was there somehow. He was there ready for that instant to bring beauty and meaning and sense and order to the random formlessness of the world's motion. And again, what are we witnessing? What are we witnessing here? How is this even possible? This is a superhuman feat of attention. And that's good. I will never do that. And that's okay. I'm allowed not to be a superhuman. So it lets me off the hook in that respect with photography. But I do recognize and understand something of that power and what it does. And just occasionally, I've had the smallest glimpse of it myself. This is the best photograph I ever took in August 2010. It's the one I'm proudest of. It was a time when I was working hard on photographing, on paying attention, on being there. This didn't happen by chance. I was ready for that moment, ready and able to resolve order and relationships out of the world's moving and shifting components and find them in that instance. It's a photograph I'm really not ashamed to show people like this. My life is immersed in intention. As a programmer, it's all about intention. My job, I'm a director of engineering, so I direct I instruct, I make sure that my will is done across the organization in various different ways, and I seem to be very reasonably good at that so far anyway. And that's a kind of power. But I look at this picture and it reminds me that I have tasted a different kind of power, the power of attention. And I really want that so much. We can do things with words, just like God. In programming, we use symbols to express our intention that are enacted by machines. And we make things happen. We do things. We command, instruct, and direct, and we bring things into existence. And actually, not just in programming, in the world too. I mean, apart from bringing things into existence, which I already said we can't do in the world, but all those things, we can do them in the world and in programming. Programming, there's extra bonus, we can bring things into existence too. And I use words to make these things happen, or at least I try to. And I can use words to do all kinds of things. So I can write a program to perform a task or solve a problem. And using words, I can write a threatening letter to frighten my enemies. Or I can write a love letter with a different kind of intention. But that's not the only kind of things that I can do with words in the world. So I might write a love letter not to have an effect, to express my will or as an act of intention, but to say something about something, to express something I see or feel. To say, I am here, that I have paid attention to something, and then I want or need to say it. I don't take a photograph to express my will. I take a photograph to express a different kind of meaning. I take a photograph, I do it to express my attention, not my intention, to capture something, to show something, to express my being present. It's about my being there. It's a different kind of meaning, and I think it's an equal kind of meaning. So I'm a developer. I am a programmer. I care about programming. I think about programming a lot. I might not be that great, but I do. And a letter or a story or a photograph, they can be about something. Can a program be about something? You know, programs do things, but I don't hear of programs that are about things. Is it possible? Have we missed it? Or have we just missed the opportunity? We have, you know, we all know what love songs and love poems look like. Could a love program exist? What would it look like if it did? I'm really fascinated by the relationships between programming and other crafts, photography. I love the connections that I find. Some of you I know work in engineering teams. We're familiar with the problem of developer exhaustion, the overworked developer. What happens when you ask more of the developer than the developer has to give? Burnout. It's familiar, it's a known problem. I'll show you a couple of pages on the subject from a book that was published even before I was born. Developer exhaustion. It's what happens when there are not enough active chemicals left in your developing solution to react with those in the film. It's an overworked developer. You have asked more of the chemical solution than it has to give. I'm a developer, and I don't have a darkroom at home, so I do my developing in the bath. And like the rest of my photography, not really very expertly, but I enjoy it so much, and I'm so thrilled with the results that I get from it. Do you know you can develop your film using a homemade solution, a homemade developing solution that's made of instant coffee, vitamin C, and sodium carbonate. And you can develop your photographic film using that. I have such fun with this. So here's a photograph that I developed using instant coffee and vitamin C powder, taken with a 50-year-old film camera that I found on eBay for about 60 euros or so that I had to repair before I could even use it. So the pleasure of photography, it's not all about the product, the photograph, the images that you result with, that are the result. And it's the same in programming. There are also these constellations of machinery, of working with the tools of the craft. That's the actual camera, the Canonet G3 QL17, which is such an enormous name for such a small camera. I don't know how they managed to fit it on it. It's from 1972, one of my very, very favorite cameras. And the affection for computers and cameras, I think, is shared by other programmers and photographers. I love cameras. I think they're beautiful machines. This is that same one. I know it really intimately. Almost every single piece of it, I've disassembled it completely and rebuilt it. You know, not down to that level, but down to the individual parts of things like the rangefinder and the exposure mechanism and the film advance mechanism. I spent a lot of time, when I have time, inside cameras. And some of the pleasure of that comes from being able to have an effect, being able to repair these things, for example. But a lot of the pleasure comes just from being able to understand them. What I feel is that I want to know them. And we're always asking these questions, especially in the age of AI, and usually answering them in really stupid ways. But I think machines can have souls, because I think only something with a soul could have such a rich personality as that camera. When I encounter it, I feel there's something here that is worth meeting and knowing, like a person. I want to be with them, and I want to know them in the same way I want to be with or know somebody that I love. I want to understand their thoughts. I want them to tell me what they feel. So these mechanisms in this camera, they're delicate and intricate physical mechanisms. And they encode logic and processes. They contain if-then logic. They encode sequences of events described in levers and springs, and they're alive with meaning and intention and purpose. And nobody explained any of that to me. I had to work it out. Or, actually, it feels as though they whispered their secrets to me because they trusted me. Honestly, I've met people and I've doubted if they had souls, but I don't doubt that here. And working on one of these cameras for me and seeing how it works, it feels like an intimate conversation with the people who created it, who I'm sure now are all dead. It's like receiving a message that traveled through time to reach me across decades. I want to say, I understand you. I can read I've got your message. I understood what you were saying and thinking. I feel the presence of those people. It's like reading their words when I'm in there. So in that experience, I feel I understand or have the power of attention. I have attended to this thing with a desire to be there, not to force myself on it, but to understand it and to know it, to be present with it. I literally have tended to it, taken care of it with tenderness. Yet another word that comes out of this these same roots. So I ask, can a program be about something? Could a love program exist? Well, I recreated my Canonet QL17 G3 in object-oriented Python. All of the parts of the program are Python objects, and every piece of the camera is a Python object. And their behaviors and the logic encoded into them and into their mechanisms are in the relationships of those Python objects and their methods. And the camera in software behaves like the real thing. So, because I'm a programmer, I can bring the camera into existence out of nothing, as if I were God. And it comes loaded, ready, with a roll of 100 ASA film, and I advance the film lever, and the machinery engages, and all the things that are happening in the software are the things that happen inside the camera. And I press the shutter release button, and now the light meter energizes, and it takes a reading, which is turned into a value for the aperture and applied to the iris, and the shutter opens for a fraction of a second and then closes again. All the things that you don't see inside the camera, but they're happening inside the code. Programmed, encoded in my little program at the level of levers and springs. The classes of just one part of it, the exposure control system, that one by one interact with each other. And all of these parts are modeled in software. Some parts to make my model work, I had to model some parts that are not even detailed in the service manual. What happens when you open the back of a film camera before rewinding your film back into the roll? You ruin your roll of film. It's all on GitHub. It's documented well, of course. It's a single camera.py file of a few hundred lines of fairly simple Python. For some reason, there's about 150 stars on GitHub, so it said something to somebody else somehow, for some reason. And why? What is the point of all this? What's it for? Well, it's not to do anything, because it doesn't do anything. But it's for me, because I love the camera, because of the experience I had in my encounter with it, because I felt something that affected me, because I paid deep attention to it, and it rewarded me with some kind of tender secrets. And I encountered something that astonished me, and I wanted to find a way to say it somehow. And this was really, for me, an experience of attention. It's not a program that does anything. So I wrote a program about something. I wrote a love program. And generally, we value intention over attention. We associate intention with activity, with being vigorous, with having will, making a difference to the world, and attention means waiting, and I mean literally in some languages, being passive, not making a difference to anything. But these differences are not so clear-cut, and these meanings and associations, they shift and flip depending on which direction you're looking at them from in which language, what's active and what's passive. They come in and out of focus at different times. Sometimes a word will have a more active shade and sometimes a less active shade, and it's not even consistent. And it's so easy to forget that there is active creation in attention. Because Garry Winogrand, he didn't put those people there to photograph them. He didn't arrange those bodies. The scene is not of his intention. The arrangement of those bodies is just a brute fact of the world with no meaning whatsoever. But with his seeing, with this magnificent power that he had to be there, he created the photograph. And the form and the meaning, the value are all his work, his creation, created out of his attention. He died. He was only 56 when he died. But his encounters with the world, they are so intense. There are lifetimes packed into each 125th of a second that he took to make a photograph. So we shouldn't confuse intention with creation or creativity with activity in the way that we often do. We mustn't conflate attention and acts like seeing or listening with passivity or inertness. In school, as a small, not even just as a small child, but as a young person, I remember this awful injunction to pay attention while my childish body just itched with a kind of frustration. And pay is the right word, because they really made me pay. I was made to pay, and I got nothing in return. I'm paying for it still because it took me decades to find and understand and find ways to value attention as well as intention. And we live in an attention deficit world because people like me have found it very hard to find value and meaning or even pleasure in attention. So we do things with words, programmers and gods. But there are other people who also do things with words, who are not God or programmers. Poets, Mary Oliver, who died 5 years ago, I think she experienced the same profundity of being there that Garry Winogrand did and was able to express it too in a different way. One of her best-known poems is Sometimes, and this is just a very short, 4 lines for it, a very short section. Instructions for living a life. Pay attention. Be astonished. And tell about it. So pay attention, to be there, to be fully present and alive, to be astonished, to be open and receptive, to be willing to be moved or changed by what you encounter, and to tell about it because it has to be shared, because you have to find a way to express it, because it's too much to remain unexpressed. And maybe there are good instructions for life. I think there are also instructions for being a photographer, or instructions for being in love, or for writing a program about a camera, maybe. I think there is a truth there, that when you can be truly there, when you can truly pay attention to someone or something that you love, that sometimes they will tell you something profound in return. And that's what I've tried to do in various ways, and sometimes I think I might even have succeeded a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniele. Now I'm wondering, am I a developer or not? Do we have developers in the audience? Let's see. What do they think? Developers? We have a developer for sure, 2 developers. It's also time for questions. We have the 2 mics, they're still there, and we also already have someone walking towards it.
So yes, you were talking about attention, right? And in the age of social media, you see that a lot of attention is commercialized, right? The asking of attention for advertisements and that kind of stuff. But that is also interwoven in the attention of your real social contact. And I'm wondering, how do you see it, that we can manage that we don't get insane?
What do you mean by your real social context?
So the people that you care about, that are around you.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think that's... they don't, by the way, I think that they don't necessarily need to be the people that you care about. It could be the people that you hate, or the ones that hate you. But like with Garry Winogrand with his 28mm lens, he was having close encounters with all of those. And there are consequences of having those encounters. Sometimes they're bad consequences, but they are real consequences. You know, you saw the looks of those people, if they could jump out of the frame, what they might do. Whereas there's such a distance in a lot of social media that the layer, there's something in between. And I think you're right that the encounters without consequences there seems to be something missing from them. We have so many of them, but they don't add up to very much. I'm not sure if I really addressed in any successful way what you were asking about.
Question, I think.
Yeah. I think that we have to fight for attention, and we have this expression to pay attention, and it does cost us something to pay attention, but we should get something in return.
Thank you.
Daniele, you started talking about intention, realizing intention is kind of the godlike aspect of programming. And you moved to attention, in some ways kind of inspiring even more godlike feeling, right? Out of the aspect of what cannot be calculated or predicted, that uncertainty in attention. And so I'm wondering if programming and the predictability of it and the finite way in which the outcome can be predicted is in fact not the most godlike. So I'm suspecting that you're in fact advocating for quantum computing as the more godlike way for us to live our lives, because it's uncertainty, it's attention because you can't quite know the outcome. Is that the message?
No, I'm not sure if it is, but if you don't tell it, I'm not really an expert on God either. So, the thing, we never hear about God's attention. Only, God wills this, God wills that, God sets things in motion. There is something about the determinism. Our programs should be deterministic, and our computers should be deterministic. That means that they are, when things go wrong, when we've got a bug, that there must be a way to solve it. Because if there's not just randomness, for example, indeterminacy taking place inside those machines. Otherwise, we would lose all hope, I think, as programmers. It's bad enough as it is, isn't it, with complicated determinism. Imagine if they were indeterministic and we had to fix the bugs. That would be just too much to demand of us. Why did you ask about quantum computing?
Because I had an issue with that statement in the beginning about realization of intention is the most godlike expression. I feel that there's part of creativity, the true godlike experience, happens when the unpredictable arrives. Like I come from physical science, life science. The greatest miracles are not from what I expected as an outcome. It comes from the unexpected. So I'm really antagonizing you there.
I think that, for example, in photography, the creativity is not, you don't create stuff, you don't create matter, but it is a creative act. And it's funny that you're not quite sure whether you're finding the form and symmetry and meaning, because the photographer is not arranging those bodies on the bench or the animal and its tongue and the handler's hat. He's not arranging those things, but coming onto them, and yet the meaning comes from the artist in that case. Not the brute facts are what the brute facts are. So I think that the creativity is only in the world of form rather than stuff. And I'm not sure if that makes a difference, actually. So I don't know. Yeah, you've successfully antagonized me, Cindy. So. I'm here all day with more opinions about the use of the subjunctive in programming languages, so if anybody wants advice on that, I'm available for that too. Otherwise, if we don't have any further questions or comments or argument, there is one there, so please, yeah. I'm just going to show that QR code, so if anyone's interested in the Documentation Academy, please take that link.
So the thing about being subjective, like in the imperative mood instead of declarative mood, there's so you said in the beginning that it feels like programming is like make it be like make the will happen. In in a way, it's you don't make it out of thin air. You still like tell something to do it for you. Like you like when you're programming in Python, you have to tell the Python interpreter to make that happen. Or even in the lowest level, you still tell the machine to do something for you, and so it in being in imperative mood might not be that wrong, but it depends on the abstraction level because most of the time you don't deal with Python interpreter, you just use it, and in the way you could say that you make it happen out of the will. So in a way, you are not wrong. It depends on which abstraction layer you see.
Yeah. And I think that's probably right. And, you know, as you say, everything is already given to us. We're not creating the whole universe out of nothing. We're creating, you know, I think I'm creating something out of nothing, but I'm creating it in the context of those Python rules that were already established. So it's a little world. And I think that's it. It's a little world. It's a really, I think this is why programmers are so, I think why people find comfort in programming, because it's a neat little world, unlike the filthy world outside, where we don't have that control, where it does seem indeterministic to us. You know, I'm thinking about the world of politics, for example, never mind physics. And we can retreat into our little worlds. Maybe that's not such a safe thing for us to do either. Yeah.
This is the last question, I think.
Yeah, I was just going to ask a question to keep the QR code up for longer. But I couldn't help but notice that all the photographs that you chose had people in. And the poetry also was about people. And you talked about soul. So where is the soul in programming?
You know, it's true, I did choose those photographs of people, and partly because it's the kind of photography that I admire the most and aspire to the most and wish that's the one I really would like to do better. That's why the photograph that I was proud of is one of people. I think there is, I see it in programs and also in documentation and people's writing. Sometimes you know who the programmer is when you read the code, if you know them well enough. You see it, you think, I recognize, in some cases, I've seen it literally from the format of code on the page, how it looks, but also from the way they use abstractions and so on, because they are our works, and we do put ourselves into them. You know, we do put our personality into them, just the same way that we do into a photograph or a painting or a poem. You know, this is why, I don't know why they teach computer science in universities. Programming has nothing to do with science, obviously. It's an art, it's a craft that people do. And computer science is a completely different thing. I don't know why they teach that. What I mean is, I don't know why it's important for programmers. Maybe that's just me showing my ignorance, but it seems to me that programming is actually a very personal thing as well, which is why people have such rows about it when they're trying to do it in teams together. So I don't know if that helps answer. I think we're out of time, aren't we?
We are out of
Thank
time,
you.
but we are hiring indeed.
Yeah.
The QR code stayed longer.
Thank you.
So thank you for the question, and thank you, Daniele,
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.